That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
Leave it alone. So the second document is entitled, What Epstein's Bodyguard Warned About His CIA Connections. The third document is from Fox Digital. It's titled, Epstein's Private Calendar Reveals Planned Meetings with Obama Admin Official, CIA Chief. And the last document is Wall Street Journal article that highlights Ehud Barak's 36 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was the former Prime Minister of Israel and head of military intelligence for Israel. It may have held that title when he met Epstein, and then, yes.
Without objection, the gentleman will hold for a second. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one UC request. This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million.
In just 47 seconds, the calm atmosphere of the Congress Hall shifted into a chilling tension. Representative Thomas Massie had just asked the question that no one had dared to voice. Mr. Director, would you be willing to consult the CIA's file on Jeffrey Epstein? Before him, FBI Director Kash Patel flashed a nervous smile before responding in a measured tone. If such a file exists, and if it has not already been provided to the FBI, we will examine any new leads for investigation. The tone was calm, but the words were heavy. The audience, the cameras, the members of Congress, all understood that something had just been crossed. The hearing would not be a mere formality. That night, the United States was about to delve into the shadows of a network that had haunted the corridors of power for decades. Behind the institutional facade, one question loomed: how far can the truth be buried? Massie continued, asking questions about the January 6th attack, then about the Las Vegas shooting. Each topic echoed a shared national frustration, unfinished investigations, incomplete answers, and always that feeling that justice does not apply equally to all. But that night, the focus remained on a single name, Epstein. A name that, for many Americans, embodies scandal, manipulation, and betrayal. A name that should have been synonymous with trial, but which faded away in a cell without a convincing explanation. The hearing had barely begun, and already, the room was holding its breath. This was no longer just a political question. It was a moral test for America. When Representative Massie presented 4 documents for the official record, the atmosphere became electric. The first, titled The Sick History of Jeffrey Epstein, quoted former federal prosecutor Alex Acosta. "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and that we should leave him alone." A sentence like a thunderclap. The second document mentioned warnings from a former bodyguard of Epstein regarding his connections to the CIA. The third, an article from Fox Digital, revealed planned meetings between Epstein and a former CIA chief under the Obama administration. The last, from the Wall Street Journal, detailed no less than 36 meetings between Epstein and Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel and former head of military intelligence. Without objection, the documents were added to the record. But in the room, a murmur swept through the benches. These names, these dates, these connections, they formed a puzzle whose center remained invisible. Massie, focused, continued. He spoke of the FD 302s, the internal FBI reports drafted from victim testimonies. These files, he claimed, contain names, bankers, politicians, film producers, members of royal families, figures of power. The congressman posed the fatal question to Kash Patel: "Have you investigated these individuals?" The director replied calmly, "No credible evidence has been found." An answer that, far from soothing, fueled anger. For millions of viewers, this scene symbolized the failure of a system. The FBI spoke of insufficient evidence, but for many, it was rather the will to avoid disturbing the powerful. The hearing then took an explosive turn. Faces tightened. Cameras moved in closer. The curtain on impunity was beginning to tear. The most tense moment of the hearing came when Thomas Massie, eyes fixed on Kash Patel, slowly read a list of names contained in the FD 302 reports. His voice echoed in the silence. A British bank CEO, a Hollywood producer, a European prince, a Canadian billionaire, a former high-ranking American official. Each name represented a part of the global elite. These individuals had, according to testimonies, benefited from Epstein's services. The victims, some still teenagers at the time, had spoken, described, pleaded to be heard. But their words had been filed away, categorized as not actionable. Massie then slammed his hand on the table. "Mr. Patel, these files are in your hands. Why has no investigation been opened into these individuals?" Patel, visibly uncomfortable, hid behind procedures. 3 successive administrations have examined this evidence and found no legal basis to charge anyone else. A murmur of anger arose in the room. This was not the first time an official had invoked administrative limits to avoid hot topics. But that night, the defense seemed hollow. Cameras zoomed in on Patel, his face tense. America watched, incredulous. Massie continued, relentless. "You say the victims are not credible? That after 20 years of silence, they would still be making things up?" Patel replied in a low voice, "That is not my assertion, Mr. Representative. It is the conclusion of several prosecutors' offices." But the damage was done. The exchange revealed more than mere incompetence. It showed the fear of opening a case whose ramifications could reach the highest echelons of power. For those watching from the gallery, doubt was no longer permitted. Epstein did not act alone. And if the evidence had never reached the legal threshold, it might be because that threshold, like the truth, had been carefully raised to protect certain names. In Massie's gaze, a burning certainty resided. Justice does not always protect victims. Sometimes, it protects interests. As the hearing dragged on, the tone shifted. Thomas Massie spoke less like a politician and more like an outraged man. "You met with influencers to discuss these documents, Mr. Patel. Will you meet the victims, those who have lost everything?" he asked. The question shot across the room like lightning. Patel attempted a response. The FBI will meet anyone with new information. But Massie interrupted. I'm not talking about the FBI. I'm talking about you. Will you meet them? A silence fell. Patel looked down. Our agents will handle that. It was a moment of brutal truth. The man meant to embody justice had just confessed his lack of humanity. Cameras captured the tense faces of the Congress members. On social media, clips from the session were already circulating across the country. The families of the victims watched from their homes. Some cried, others screamed. For years, they had shared everything: private jets, islands, names, threats. And everything had been classified. This hearing might be their last chance for their voices to finally be heard. Massie then spoke of another scandal, the hasty release of unredacted documents containing the names of victims, a leak that the FBI had mishandled. You exposed them a second time, Mr. Patel, he charged accusatory. This statement shook the room. It was no longer just a legal matter, it was a moral one. The shame of a system that protects the powerful while delivering the most vulnerable. At that moment, it became clear that Massie was not seeking to create a political scandal. He demanded a human response. In 47 seconds, everything changed. Massie, leafing through his papers, calmly asked a question that froze the room. Mr. Patel, would you be willing to consult the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? The murmurs of the audience turned into absolute silence. Patel took a slow breath and replied, if such a file exists, and if it hasn't already been forwarded to the FBI, we will examine any new investigative elements. A calculated, almost mechanical phrase, but heavy with implications. The conditional, if it exists, made the journalists twitch. The man who led the country's main investigative agency seemed to ignore or feign ignorance of whether such an explosive file existed. This simple doubt ignited a fire. The faces of the other members of Congress hardened. The hearing took on an almost metaphysical turn. They were no longer talking about just one man or even a network, but an entire system built on secrecy and the hierarchy of knowledge. In the corridors of the Capitol, some were already whispering that Epstein's name was merely the visible part of a much older iceberg, where intelligence, influence, and compromise intertwine. Feeling the ground slip away, Patel tried to regain control. We are working closely with all agencies. If there is information shared by the CIA, it will be handled according to existing protocols. But this administrative response only worsened the discomfort. The public perceived in this caution not professionalism, but fear. Massie understood that he had just touched the heart of the issue, a bureaucratic labyrinth where each department points fingers at the other until the truth gets lost between the walls. So, if no one knows who is really protecting justice, he asked in a calm but icy voice. Patel did not respond. This silence, broadcast live on all channels, had more impact than an admission. In this mutism, everything could be heard: the weight of secrecy, the invisible hand of power, and the despair of a nation still trying to understand why some crimes seem above the law. As the session drew to a close, the commission chairman announced the reading of one last document. An unsigned memorandum dated July 7, 2025, he specified. The text, originating from the Department of Justice, stated that the evidence gathered did not justify the opening of further investigations against uncharged parties. This phrase, seemingly sober, felt like a condemnation. It marked the official end of a case that millions of Americans still believed was open. The cameras turned to Massie. His face expressed the same dismay as that of the public. Once again, the truth stopped at the gates of power. But before the chairman could adjourn the session, Massie spoke one last time. His voice, low and firm, drowned out the noise of chairs. Mr. Chairman, what we heard today is not merely an administrative debate. It is a lesson on what justice becomes when transparency becomes a threat. In the stands, some applauded quietly. Others remained still, overwhelmed by bitterness. Patel, meanwhile, kept his gaze fixed, trapped in his role. Commentators would later speak of a historic moment, the instant when a member of Congress dared to voice what many had long suspected, that the shadow of power sometimes suffocates the truth. That night, the public did not seek to know who had won the debate. What they retained was the question left hanging: is justice still the same for everyone? The lights went out, the microphones were cut, but the concluding phrase, spoken by the live narrator, remained etched in minds. What we witnessed today was not a mere parliamentary exchange. It was a mirror held up to America. A mirror that reminds us that as long as the powerful can choose the truths they show, citizens will continue to seek those that are hidden from them. And as the black screen replaced the images of the Capitol, one idea lingered in the air. The truth does not depend on rank, but on the courage of those who still dare to speak it.